쪽은 쪽하야 되겠다. 예무전에 저지문에 하나 나기 조거 복제 보들이 후펀니 복제 보들이 쪽월라 비제짓 미지 풀도ing manjimananya handaras. We translated we've been translating the United Nations law into the Mvskoke Creek language. It's been a challenge for our team. There's four of us that helps translate, but in the beginning it was the Creek Nation enacted in September of 2016 that the council members too, that they would go translate the United Nations law into the Mvskoke language. In the beginning, it began with 4 chiefs and 1 translator. Right now, at the present, we have 2 chiefs, Miko George Thompson and Miko Bill Proctor. From the Language Preservation Department, you have Philip Harjo, Brandon Barnett, Gracie Hicks, and I as the translators. You have the Honorable Judge Bigler from the District Court from the Yuchi tribe. When we first attended these meetings, we knew we were intimidated because we're not lawyers, we're not scholars, and we have no clue about law language. So when we went into this, it was intimidating. Our first meeting, we met George Thompson, Miko George Thompson, Miko Bill Proctor, and Judge Bigler. And from this meeting, we knew it was a very important project that we were asked to do. Gracie Hicks and I, being the only 2 women in the presence of 2 chiefs and a judge, and other men, is unusual for our people and our tribe. Like Yoni was saying, women is outside, and they're the ones that does the discussions and stuff. Well, it's unusual for us to be in there, but we were asked to do this, so we took on this task. And it was a task. The challenge was great. There were words in there that our Mvskoke language doesn't have, like inter alia, contruse, redress. We had no clue. For our team, for our speakers, and like I said, not being law students, we had to take this challenge of words and translate them into the Mvskoke language. Judge Bigler, he was a big instrument in our meetings. He would take the law language and translate it into plain English that we could understand, so that we can take this and put it into the Mvskoke language. It took us a while. It would take reading, rereading, trying to take the definitions, trying to find a Mvskoke word that would fit that word exactly. Every meeting that we attended, it was like 3.5 hours long. And imagine taking an article and taking one section, breaking it down, including law language and all the articles, and then doing it in Mvskoke language. It was challenging. But as time went on, it was like Judge Bigler would sit there and just patiently sit there with us and say, okay, this is what this article is saying. This is what this word means. So the 4 translators, we'd sit in there and say, okay, this is how it can be done. This is how it can be written. This is what it's saying. It was, the 3.5 hours went to me in like 10 minutes. There were times we didn't even finish one section in the article because it was so, the law language is different from what we speak, and of course there's nothing in the Mvskoke language that has that. So we had to take these words and find it and fit it and make sure that it meant what it meant, precise and accurate. Miko Bill Proctor and George Thompson, they would break down words for us and say, okay, I think this is what this is saying. I think this is, and it was always think for us. But it had to be precise and accurate, because this was for our people and for every indigenous person and peoples of this world. It was for us. So we had to make sure that it was precise and accurate. As we went into these meetings, it was a learning experience for the four people that speaks a language fluently, and we're not masters at it, but we speak fluently. We grew up with it. We were born into it. It was a challenge, but really a great experience, and it became personal. There were some articles that we read that we heard that our elders had spoken of, that was taught to us, each one of us. Judge Bigler would have a story of his teachings, of his grandmother's spoken words. And so did we. We would sit there and we would listen to our elders, because back then, it's not like it is now. Back then, when the elders spoke, it was the golden rule. We had to listen. We had to take it in. We had to follow what was told to us. So we would go back. We shared a lot of things that our elders had remembered as we were children, knowing that things are changed as this generation comes. Things have changed from this generation to our generation, but yet still the same. You have the UG, and you have 4 Mvskoke Creeks at this round table discussing these articles, trying to get it for future generations. But yet, as we would share our different upbringings in our different ways, but yet the one thing that we had in common was we were all indigenous peoples, working for the same cause for our future. What these laws meant to our people, what this was going to do to help the Mvskoke people and everybody that's involved with this. This was something that we won't soon forget. For me, it became very personal. It was something that I took this challenge on, and I learned a lot. The most important thing that I learned in these sessions, these 3.5 long sessions, with the help from Judge Bigler, George Thompson, Bill Proctor, these laws are there to protect traditions, cultures. Like Yoni was saying, he couldn't pick a medicine off the side of the road. It protects us. It lets us hang on to our healing plants. It protects lands that holds our healing plants. Water, trees. He said his important tree was a willow. We make our traditional things out of hickory. We make our foods from the hickory. Just might be just a tree to some people, but for us, it's something that we use as traditional people. There were things but one thing that really stood out to me was that said it was protecting our language. My language, the very one that I speak, that I grew up with. and the rest of our crew that spoke that. It said it protected our language. That's our identity, not only the language, but our identity, our foundation of our people. It's who we are. This language is unique as the blood that runs through my veins and every Mvskoke person. The Yuchi blood that runs through Judge Bigler's veins. All the indigenous people, they got a unique, they have unique blood that runs through their veins. This was for us that we did this law. It was an honor, even though it was a challenge. I would like to share a few of the articles that we did, translated to the language. Got a few examples here. Article 21. It says the indigenous peoples have the right, without discrimination, to the improvement of their economic and social conditions, including inter alia, here it goes, in the areas of education, employment, vocational training, and retaining housing, sanitation, health, and social security. Istijadagi imabogida ojada nagi hinti mijidaya inikjida ojit ampakka shiburuwatis. That's ours now. That belongs to the nation because it's done in the Mvskoke language. It says indigenous peoples have the right to lands, territories, and resources which they have traditionally owned, occupied, or otherwise used or acquired. Excuse me. Resources, the medicines, the trees, the water, our healing plants. Istijadagi igana CNG abogadi CNG ibet dai istofes yiktida ojagidos. That's ours. That's going to be the future. Hoping that history will not repeat itself. The indigenous people, Article 29, indigenous peoples have the right to conservation and protection of the environment and the productive capacity of their lands or territories and resources. States shall establish and implement assistance programs for indigenous people for such conservation and protection without discrimination. Istijadagi igana oja hadam nagi igana opoja siane jagad imidalagi afastigibet imidagi omatis igan sakatlako nagi manejagi daya antapasigod omatis. Those are strong words in the Mvskoke language. Those are very strong words in the Mvskoke language. Indigenous peoples have the right to determine and develop priorities and strategies for the development or use of their lands and territories and other resources. Istijadagi istumi igana sianeti daya munga igana nagi sianeti daya mijida ichida oji duwatis. But these laws in English may not, to a non-speaker, be not as strong, but in the Mvskoke language, they're very strong. And we've claimed it. It's the nation's, because it is now done in the Mvskoke language. This is to every indigenous, this helps every, this knowledge is not for Mvskoke people. It's for every indigenous peoples of the world. But this tells us that the Mvskoke people took this challenge. It's ours. Gives us a little bit of strength. This is something that was an honor for me, thinking about the future, thinking about generations to come, and read this and say, they thought about me. My grandkids, your grandkids, are little children and people that has not even stepped foot on this land yet. That's coming. This is for them. And hoping that history doesn't repeat itself. That they will have security. Their culture, their traditions, their ceremonies, their healing plants. Everything that they depend on that makes them Mvskoke Creek. This was an honor for me. It became very personal because I have children. I have grandchildren. One day I'll be a great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother. One day I'll be history to my family. Each and every one of you will be history to your family. You will be history. And this is what this is for. It was an honor. Mado.
While she's pulling that up here, we'll have you take a look at this and go back. Article 29, you can take Article 29. There you go. In English, again, we'll go with that. I just wanted to highlight some things that, for instance, what I learned. Indigenous peoples have the right to conservation and protection of the environment, production capacity of their lands and territories, and resources. The state shall establish and implement assistance programs for Indigenous people for such conservation and protection without discrimination. Read that again in Mvskoke.
Istidara igana oja, hada magi igana opoja, siene jaga, imida git apastagibet, imidiktangi omatis, igan sakko nagi, manejagi daya, antlakasibot omatis.
Now, again, what I'd like you to do is go ahead and translate the Mvskoke words back into English in that last sentence.
Okay, the land. Okay, Oklahoma. If there's anything on that land, by this law, it says if they can use it, there will be no discrimination and they have the right to it.
What's that last word?
Woman is strong. It will be. It's making a statement. It's a very strong word. Woman means it's strong. It's there. It means it will be. It will be.
All right, thank you. And then, as we go through those things like that, you think about it, Omathlis means it shall be, it must be, there is no other way that it shall be. You wonder, is that used in the language when we had our treaties? Is that how they interpreted them in Mvskoke? And yet somehow they changed them. So, anyway, we'll pass this over to Alexey again for his perspectives on the declaration and working with that. So, and then we'll have for anybody at the end.
Is it possible to? Yes, and excuse me for taking the floor once again. But it's a pleasure and honor to speak about all this before you, and because there are more legitimate people here in this room who are current members of the mechanism, but I will try to say a couple of words about what the expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous peoples has done to support the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in general, but also more specifically indigenous languages, since the mechanism has been also part of this process of proclamation of the UN, of the International Year of Indigenous Languages. So just to give a quick overview of the UN indigenous specific mechanisms, there are three major mechanisms. One of these is UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's an individual mandate, and it's quite strong. So the Special Rapporteur has the right to interact with states and raise critical issues. The rapporteur also receives complaints and messages from indigenous peoples around the globe and communicate those concerns to states and UN agencies. But also the rapporteur can undertake country visits to investigate situations on the ground. So we also have permanent forum on indigenous issues, which is the 16 members subsidiary body of the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, based in New York. And this forum has the mandate to discuss issues related to education, health, human rights, environment, and so on. And the forum also provides advice to the Economic and Social Council and coordinates indigenous specific activities within the United Nations system. So its mandate is to maintain indigenous issues across the UN, including all the agencies like UNESCO, Food and Agriculture Organization, and so on. And the UN expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous peoples is the newest expert body in this family. Was established in 2007 after the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples has been adopted. And the mandate of this mechanism is to provide advice to the United Nations Human Rights Council. So this expert mechanism is a subsidiary body to the UN Human Rights Council and based in Geneva. Currently, it's a 7 members, 7 experts body. So these experts are chosen from 7 socio-cultural regions where indigenous peoples live. For example, I represented Eastern Europe and Russian Federation, and my colleague, Professor Carpenter, she's representing North America. And we have also people, representatives from Africa, Pacific, Asia, Arctic, and Latin America and the Caribbean. So there are 2 resolutions of the Human Rights Council which determine the full scope of work of the mechanism. So the first one was from 2007, when the mechanism was established first, but then there was a process after the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples in 2014, when indigenous peoples demanded to create a special monitoring body to monitor how the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is being implemented by states. But states, of course, said that this is not possible because the declaration is not a legally binding instrument, and the states proposed to revise mandate of one of the mechanisms and amend with specific functions. So the mechanism of experts of the Human Rights Council was, its mandate was reviewed in 2016, And according to the resolution of 2016, now the mechanism can provide technical advice for the Human Rights Council by conducting thematic studies, like every year. Also, we can do overviews on how the declaration is being implemented with focus on specific topics. One of the major advancements of this mandate is that we can also undertake country missions by request of indigenous peoples and/or governments, and provide technical assistance and facilitate dialogue. It can be, for example, providing advice on policies, on reviewing policies, legislation in specific countries, to also provide to facilitate dialogue between different stakeholders, not only indigenous peoples and states, but also private sector as a third party, and so on. So these are some pictures from our activities, annual sessions in Geneva every July, where we get together all the 7 experts, but also all observers. So these sessions are very open for observers who can contribute, make statements, and speak from the floor. We can have intersessional meetings in different countries. So far we had in Chile, for example, and there was a meeting with President of Chile at the time, Michelle Bachelet, who is now UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And last year we had a meeting in Chiang Mai, Thailand, where we also had the chance to interact with Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, Indigenous umbrella organization of the country. And this picture is from our mission to Finland last year, where we spoke about museums and the role of museums in preservation of cultural heritage of indigenous peoples, but also intangible culture and languages. And on this picture we can see the current newly elected chair of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, Ms. Anna Norgam from Inari Sami people in Finland. We have undertaken so far 12 studies, including on the right to health, participation in decision making, access to justice, role of languages and cultures in promotion and protection of the rights of indigenous peoples, cultural heritage, businesses and human rights. And the current study is on migration, borders and displacement, which will be presented to the Human Rights Council in the coming September. And of course, indigenous languages, as we decided, because I don't remember over my 6-year term, I don't remember a single study where we didn't consider indigenous languages as a cross-cutting topic, because it's so important for many other rights. And I think that I would also highlight a little bit more this country engagement element of the mandate, because it's very important for indigenous peoples and also for states, because states, under the review process, states said that there are so many issues where advice of experts could be very useful. And our colleagues just undertook a visit to New Zealand last month, when by request of Maori people and the government of New Zealand, who would like to jointly introduce an action plan on the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And this is an important step forward, because not so many states have implemented, actually I don't know even a single one, who have implemented a policy or an action plan on the implementation of the declaration, despite the fact that even the outcome document of the UN conference World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, where states unanimously committed to introduce such action plans, but I think New Zealand is one of the first who would do that using the advice of the expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous peoples. Last year we visited Finland also, and participated in the review of the Sami Parliament Act. So this act regulates the self-determination rights of the Sami people, and they have the Sami Parliament as a body who decides on behalf of the Sami people and communicates those decisions to the government of Finland. So it's a self-governance body, and our advice was very useful in that process. And this is one of the current examples, also by request of Yaqui people in the US and Mexico, who would like to repatriate Mvskoke reindeer head, which is now preserved in the Museum of World Culture in Sweden. And the role of the expert mechanism would be to facilitate dialogue between the museum, the Swedish government, the Yaqui people about this particular object, which the people of the Yaqui people would like to have back in their community. And I'd like to welcome everybody to the session of the mechanism, which is in the coming July, in the middle of July. And the specific topics for that meeting will be the study of migration, displacement, and borders, but also a panel discussion on Indigenous women in power, to which we invite Indigenous women who currently serve as parliamentarians in national parliaments. We also have a follow-up discussion on the study on free, prior, and informed consent, and some other very important topics. And of course, we have decided on some future engagements and topics too. For example, the next couple of years there will be studies on land rights and a study on self-determination of indigenous peoples, and of course all stakeholders, including lawyers and judges, and everybody is welcome to provide to communicate papers and advice while we're preparing these studies. And as I said, the expert mechanism has been very active in the International Year of Indigenous Languages process, and we are part of the UNESCO-led steering committee to prepare and realize the goals of the International Year, and Kristen Carpenter will be serving in this steering committee this year, and she said that she will be very active also in the process of proclamation an international decade on indigenous languages, because there is too little time for us to really undertake measures to preserve the languages, and so far I think it's mostly anonymous support for the idea of proclamation of a decade, so we could have more time, 10 years of time, to finish these activities and to really change the situation with indigenous languages. And why actually the UN decided to have this year? And I remember, 6 years, it's kind of a long time to be in UN, and I don't remember another as short process as this one, because everything is very long in the UN. And in January of 2016, we gathered together in New York to discuss indigenous languages at an expert group meeting, and we expressed the idea of proclamation of the year of languages, and by the end of the year was already proclaimed. So it took less than 1 year for states to really proclaim the year, and I think it's because everybody understands that the situation with indigenous languages is very critical. And even the previous Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, used every opportunity to say and to repeat that every second week an indigenous language dies. It is very important also to understand all the interlinkages between indigenous languages and other human rights of indigenous peoples, including the rights to preserve biological diversity. And reportedly, reportedly biodiversity hotspots are home to about 70% of the world's languages. So there are correlations between between linguistic and biological diversity. So the key areas of the International Year of Indigenous Languages are promotion of languages. So many actors could pay more attention to the critical situation. To also raise capacity, raise awareness about indigenous languages among non-indigenous populations, which is also very important. And also to build capacity of many stakeholders, including linguistic communities themselves, financial institutions, states, authorities, and everybody else who is involved in this process. And there are many good examples. I mean, even I would like to provide one from my country, where in the island of Sakhalin we have this. I think it's a joint project by Russia and the U.S. companies, which is called Sakhalin 2. It's simply an oil and gas industry which operates in areas of residence of indigenous peoples. And so several years ago, they decided to establish an action plan to support indigenous peoples and indigenous languages. And they financed many of efforts, including the translation of the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in the Nif language, which is very valuable, small numbered community of Nif people there. They supported some translation of some Russian classics, Russian literature classics into this language, and the opposite, some Nif classic pieces in the Russian language. So this is one of the good examples how private sector would how private sector could undertake some efforts to support indigenous languages. We also spoke, while preparing to this year, we also spoke about restoration of place names. Many place names, traditional place names have been changed. In my republic we have, for example, this is one of the best examples, very poetic, very beautiful name, Kuyaki, which is, in English it would be a lake of the moon, was many decades ago by Soviet, in the Soviet time was, the name was changed into Mikhailsk, which doesn't make sense. It's not even a translation into Russian language, it's just a random name. And the struggle to come back to the traditional name is still going on, and there is a lot of reluctance by the authorities. So all of this is very important for the International Year, but also we spoke about it quite much, that this year should be a good opportunity for states, for linguistic communities themselves to really engage with each other, and somehow many people express concerns that under this year a lot of money would be given to the academia, to different big projects and so on, and community people on the grassroots level would be forgotten, neglected, and under this year we wanted to really support and acknowledge the efforts of the community leaders, linguistic activists, including activists who really do a lot of work in the cyberspace, for example, and on the ground, on the grassroots level. So this kind of activities should be really acknowledged and supported as an effort this year. And we are also trying to change the paradigm of this year, of how to approach indigenous languages. I spoke in my previous speech that there are different approaches: cultural, national security, paternalistic, and so on. And the expert mechanism has reiterated all the time that we need to apply a human rights-based approach to indigenous languages, because languages as a human right. And the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and other international instruments speak in favor of this human rights-based approach. Also, our studies of the expert mechanism, I mentioned that several studies are devoted to indigenous languages, and in one of them we really ask states to financially support, to allocate enough enough money to support indigenous languages, at least the same amount of money which has been spent to destroy indigenous languages. And this is a very strong message which I think many have received quite well. Last session of the Permanent Forum, which is still going on this week, but last week we had this discussion on indigenous languages in New York, and I think many people actually mentioned, even in the meeting of the steering committee of the International Year, that despite the fact that there is a Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and some other documents, so there are no legal binding instruments to support specifically languages and indigenous languages. So there is still a lot of work before us to do in terms of legal recognition and legal protection of indigenous languages, not only on the international level, but also nationally, regionally, subnationally, and locally. And this is one of the most important things which I wanted to say. I think doing this study on migration, we also doing another study on recognition, restitution, and reconciliation. And in this study, we say that we cannot move forward in terms of indigenous languages without recognition of past injustices, including suppression of indigenous languages in the past. In Canada, there was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission who worked over 5 years to investigate all the injustices which happened to indigenous peoples of Canada in terms of residential schools, in terms of how the schools destroyed the languages, families, and faith in and pride in our languages. And there was tens of calls for action coming out of that work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which led to the public apology by the Canadian government. And these processes are starting in other places too, like in Finland, for example, in Norway, they're establishing Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, and we think in the expert mechanism that there is a need to acknowledge and to find the truth, to acknowledge the truth, and move forward knowing this truth. Yeah, this is something, I skipped some slides because I spoke about these matters, including education and so on. But also I would like to say that indigenous languages are very important for the realization of other rights. And this picture is from the Sami Parliament in Finland. I mentioned the Sami Parliament Act, which underlines the role of indigenous languages for the political rights too, because Samis can only vote in the Sami Parliament elections if they can prove that either themselves or one of their parents or their grandparents spoke Sami language as the first language. We also, in one of the studies on businesses on human rights, we also say that indigenous businesses can be only sustainable if they are based on languages and cultures of indigenous peoples. So there are also correlations in this sphere. And I'm sorry, the beginning of slide somehow disappeared, but I wanted to say that for the economic rights, languages are also very important. So in Russia we have this legislative process now on the so-called socio-cultural assessment or ethnological expertise. So this is a procedure which should be prior to any infrastructure projects on indigenous lands. So there should be assessment on how this project could impact ecological situation and social-cultural situation too. But it is very important also to understand how projects can really impact the languages of indigenous peoples. And as I said, we really need a decade to think more about it, to do more work on languages, and undertake such measures which seem to be untimely before that. And I would like to encourage you to engage with the expert mechanism through the North American member sitting here, but also as a pool. And there will be also in the Human Rights Council in September, there will be a half-day panel discussion on the role of languages and languages as a human right. So this is another opportunity for everybody to discuss this matter. And this is my last point. This is something that's going on the internet, because before that I spoke about national level, international level. This is personal level. How to engage with the International Year of Indigenous Languages. So many people take this so-called Indigenous Language Challenge. It means that people promise over this year, this international year, to learn of a little bit of an indigenous language, to do something in the end of the year. For example, when I took up this challenge in the last year, I promised to learn the southern dialect of Karelian, so I could make a little presentation in this language in the Karelian language house in the village of Bielya. So thank you very much for the attention.